A lot of those guys, like the journeyman guys, you don't hear their stories told often, whether it was in the past or even now. Obviously, they've never been in the spotlight like the superstars of the day. And that's one of the great things about your pod, Ads, is that it shines a light on these guys and it really gives them a chance to delve into their careers and their own little stories and anecdotes. A lot of stuff that you'd never hear before, and a lot of it is really eye-opening and revealing.
Again, what Hal said just before was that a lot of these podcasts have given me a whole different perspective on a lot of these guys that I never really followed that closely back when they were playing. So I like to get to try to hear them speak and hear their backstory and a lot of really cool behind-the-scenes stuff, a bit of inside stuff, 90s NBA reference for you.
You would like to say it's a great insight.
Yes.
Then you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
So I'll get goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, you made the pass. Yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
Welcome to episode 50, and thanks for joining me. My website, inallairness.com. Just add a / and the episode number to view show notes. Before we get into the episode proper, special thanks to my beautiful wife, Lisa, for being so understanding and accommodating of my passion for the podcast. Thanks to Aaron, I couldn't ask for a greater guy to have along for the ride, co-hosting 10 of the episodes, and at least, as I say this, a further 16 NB85 episodes too. Once this series is finished, then it'll certainly resume with plenty more great player interviews from all eras of the NBA. In the interim, I'll try and squeeze in the occasional episode where possible. A huge tip of the hat to Luke, my brother. We've watched and played countless hours of basketball throughout the 1990s and 2000s, and close friends Todd Spear, Adam Howes, and Reese Pedretti, all advocates of the show who share a love for the great game of basketball. Of course, this show would be nothing without two crucial components: you, the listener, and the guests themselves. I won't single anyone out, however, each and every one of you contribute, allowing the podcast to occupy its own unique online home. If you enjoy the show, please do tell your friends about it. It's the best way for the podcast to grow. I'll round out my appreciation with a special thanks to Paul Corliss and the National Basketball Retired Players Association. I'm really excited for what our future collaborations will bring. In this special episode, I'm joined by great friends, the aforementioned Aaron and Adam. We chat about how we first fell in love with the NBA, and then I detail how the podcast originated. We also discuss the high-profile guests who have appeared on the show, plus the many topic-based episodes too. Now, you'll hear the edited audio version of our Google Hangout, which we actually recorded live on September the 25th, 2014. I finally found the time to put this episode together. Should you prefer, you can watch our conversation. Visit inallairness.com/50, the number 50, to scroll down the page and you'll see the embedded video. It's worth watching, if for nothing else, than to see Aaron wearing Horace Grant-style goggles. Throughout this episode, I've inserted voicemail feedback from listeners of the show in the order it was received. So thank you to Stephen from the First Take UK podcast, Josh from redrockbasketball.com, Luke, yes, my brother, who will be appearing in future episodes of this podcast. He just doesn't know that yet. And last but certainly not least, Hank McCoy from the Courtside podcast. Thanks for taking the time to send me a message. Stay tuned towards the end of this episode as I share more excellent podcast reviews that have been received. Now, onto the show. Before we actually get into talking about the podcast itself, guys, now I'm actually pressed record on my own audio. Let's maybe quickly chat about how we first got involved following the NBA. Very briefly, myself, it was back in 1989, so I'm showing my age a bit there, just around the era of MJ and the shot against Cleveland. Started recording some games off TV here in Australia, and that virtually led to my collection of NBA games on videotape back in the day. So that's how I first got into it and just became obsessed with everything NBA and Michael Jordan, because that was one of the first games I actually ever recorded, was that game at Cleveland. So I've been obsessed ever since. That's it in a nutshell. What about you guys? Maybe Aaron, do you want to start us off after that?
My love affair for the game, it started back when I was in year 7 in school, which was 1990. My older brother, Carl, he's the one who actually got me into it. He got started on the basketball cards and playing the game and whatnot before I did. And then, of course, when you got a big brother, you just want to be like your big brother. Started collecting cards and started playing the game. And Ryan, I just mentioned to you just the other night about how from that point on, when I first started getting into the game, the obsession, it started early. My brother was concerned about how I was going in school because I'd be too distracted about basketball, because I was just obsessed with it right from the get-go. In hindsight, I look back on it and it's a very cool thing to have found something that I love as much as the NBA and the Bulls. And not only has it given me a lifelong passion, it's allowed me to do things like I'm doing tonight, which 20 years ago, I never ever thought I'd get the opportunity to do something like this, because this is about as close to TV as I'll ever get. But yeah, a lot of fun. I've made a lot of really good friendships. Our number 3 on the chat tonight, Mr. Howes, and I have been friends for 20 years now, and it was all based on the NBA and on basketball and on the Bulls. And Ryan, I met you about 18 months, 2 years ago through basketball. So yeah, it doesn't get any better, mate.
No, that's true. Now, just quickly, Adam, do you want to just quickly chat about your love of the game and when that first started as well, please, mate?
Yeah, sure thing, mate. For me, it started around 1991. I was introduced to the NBA by my cousin Edric. Shout out to Eddie if he's watching. It was through a love of basketball cards and watching it on Channel 10 every week that my addiction began, and here we are, 2014, and it's come leaps and bounds since then. Aaron touched on our friendship, which was, a result of the game of basketball. I think that's probably one of the best things that I've actually gotten from it. But, I love all facets of it. Obviously, the Bulls are my passion. Like Aaron, I didn't think that, in this day and age we'd be able to do something like this, and, that we'd have things like Twitter at our disposal where you can interact with people far and wide, that you've never even met before, in your hometown and even overseas, and which is something that I've done often, and, even met up with some of these people in my trips to Chicago and whatnot, and, which is just an amazing bonus of it all. But yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell, really.
Guys, we actually met in person back it was about a year ago, actually around this time, in 2013, that we actually met for the first time in person after having conversed online and all that sort of stuff. So that was cool to be able to meet in person as well.
Definitely.
Adam, I don't know if I found you as a fellow Bulls supporter or you found me. I don't know. How did we even get involved in first chatting back and forwards with each other to then form this friendship, and then that obviously got Aaron involved?
That's a good question, mate.
I don't even remember.
You've caught me off guard, and I actually don't recall. It must have been via Twitter, I think, initially.
Yeah, it must have been, and then I guess I just started conversing back and forwards, and then our mutual love of all things basketball just helped it develop from there. And then it was yourself, Adam, that suggested, after I initially checked if you were keen to perhaps participate in the podcast, you said that there was a guy that I'd probably be worth getting in touch with, and that is the other gentleman on this call today, Mr. Aaron Steen.
It was not long before this moment when Howes first brought the podcast to my attention, and Adam, Howes and myself have had a bit of a superiority complex when it comes to being NBA fans over the years. I kind of feel that people need to prove themselves to me before I approve of them as an NBA fan. And so when he first told me about this In All Airness podcast, I was skeptical, I'll admit. But then I found out that your first guest was a good friend of Howes and myself and Bill Wennington. So I thought, yeah, that's a pretty decent guest to have on. So I checked it out, and the other rest is history. Here we are on live TV.
Says the guy wearing Horace Grant goggles. I love it. You've absolutely, as I said before we went live with this, mate, You've absolutely trumped me with the background you've got there as well, courtesy of your very creative brother. So he's done up a fantastic Jordan wall art there that you've had for many years, I believe, which you're putting into good use tonight.
It's a wall hanging that my brother did for me probably about 15 years ago. He's a marvel with an airbrush, and nowadays he does a lot of custom art on hot rods and bike helmets and whatnot. So this is actually him in his infancy, and if he saw this right now, he would pick it apart, sudden shock, and the quality of it. But for the purpose of what I'm using it for tonight, it's absolutely perfect. And the idea came to me just this afternoon, and as soon as I saw myself in this camera shot here with my background, I thought that looks absolutely perfect.
I love it. Maybe let's just get into chatting about some of the podcast episodes and some of the topics that we've chatted about. It doesn't necessarily have to be in chronological order or anything like that, but I think it was about episode 10, Aaron, that you first became involved on the topic episodes, and we chatted about the 1993 NBA season. But before that, there were some really great guests, and the first guest of all was, as you mentioned just a moment ago, was Bill Wennington, who you've both obviously had the pleasure of meeting with him in person in Chicago. And I think even going back a few months, Adam, you had a chance to catch up again with Big Billy.
Yeah, I did, mate. Back in March of this year, I was over in Chicago covering the Bulls for my blog and for the other one that I write for, and just generally having a great old time. Able to catch up with Billy, and he's the kind of guy, as you would both know from speaking with him, that he's just very affable, very friendly, easygoing. Yeah, we went out for lunch after visiting the Birdo Center during one of the Bulls practices. Yeah, he wouldn't let me pay. He's just a gentleman. We had some fantastic Kung Pao chicken for those keeping score at home. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Does it seem a little bit surreal, the fact that you're talking about this experience that you've had, the fact that you've even had these opportunities to be able to go over there and do this sort of stuff? Because it's sort of kind of insane. And as Aaron mentioned a little while ago, the fact that there could be even these possibilities just due to the wonders of the internet, that we're actually all having a chance to sort of immerse ourselves in the NBA from so far away.
It does.
It's something that I actually had a conversation with my girlfriend Laura last night about. She's slowly understanding just how obsessed and how deeply entrenched I am in this sport and everything to do with it. And I just can't express how much of a cool thing it is for me. And like, I'm sure that you guys will concur in that I have a friend who once played for the Bulls.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff. So very cool. And with the advent of all this technology now these days, it just makes the world seem that little bit smaller and enables us to do these great sort of things. So now, Bill was a great first guest to have. I have to admit, when I was researching for the chat, I didn't know how much depth to go into, but it's sort of become a staple now that I just research a fair bit of information about these guys before I have a chance to chat to them, because basically I don't want to waste their time, and I want to make sure that I'm sure they've sat through countless interviews where the person's either done no research whatsoever or they just ask the most basic questions ever. So I try and sort of go that extra mile and make sure I have a really good understanding of what their career's been like. And I've watched a lot of their games over the years anyhow, because I'm just obsessed with that era, of course. So I've seen a lot of their games, and I want to ask questions that interest me, and in turn I think that would interest listeners to the show. So Bill was fantastic, but boy, I was ridiculously nervous the night that I first did that Skype call with him. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and I was absolutely freaking out. And it was a video call. I could see him face to face through Skype. It was quite confronting to see him on the screen, but he couldn't have been any nicer, and it was just a fantastic first guest. Mate, just while we're waiting for Aaron to come back, and I'll get him back into the chat here, do you want to maybe just briefly tell us about your website, which you've got going, which is called Bulls on Parade?
Yes. My site basically is dedicated to the Bulls and their exploits in the past and the present. It's also a site that was born out of my love for not only the team but the city of Chicago. And so I try to approach it from a sporting and a pop cultural perspective, covering everything from the music that comes out of the city to art, all sorts of things. Basically, I've had little mini interviews with people who live in the city, friends of mine, and people who I've just become acquainted with via Twitter. It's just my little spot to sort of let loose my musings. Just try and give a bit more shine to the city that I've fallen in love with.
Fantastic. So, and Aaron, I see you've joined us back again. How's the audio this time, mate?
Yeah, being the Bill Gates esque type computer user that I am, I just realised that I had the YouTube feed open in a different page, so I had both
that's what I thought
and the
was
lag
going on.
Oh, mate. Oh, well, that's all right. We can't do anything about it, but I knew there was a reason. I'm glad you worked it out.
I'm on fire with the backgrounds, but not so much with the computer.
That's all right, mate. That's fine. So it was only the first sort of 10 to 15 minutes, so at least we worked it out now and not in 40 minutes' time.
Yeah.
So we've just chatted briefly about Adam's website, bullsonparade.me, while we got you back into the equation here, mate. So the second guest that I had on the show, episode 2, was Tom Dorr, who was the long-time Chicago Bulls commentator on the Bulls Network back in the 90s, and he was one of the guys that worked alongside the great Johnny Red Kerr. And just briefly, mate, let's quickly, both guys, because you guys are the co-administrators of the official Johnny Red Kerr Facebook page. So do you want to maybe just briefly talk about your link to do with Johnny Kerr and, of course, the opportunity you've had to actually meet with his son, Matt? Who'd like to go first?
Aaron.
Would someone like to go first?
Howes originally started the page back in 2009. Actually, it wasn't too long before Johnny actually passed away back in 2009. And it wasn't that long after that he, I guess he wanted to start getting some more content on it. So he asked me to join in using our own experience and knowledge. And we've been able to grow the page from where it was back at the start, like to having nearly 5,500 likes now, which for me is like a very cool thing. And the opportunities that it's opened up for us to interact with Bulls fans all over the world, because one thing that Facebook pages allow you to do is see who likes your page and in what countries that these people live in, and the amount of different countries that we have fans of the page in is it's a really cool thing. Don't you agree, Adam Howes?
Yeah, just touching on what Aaron was saying about the analytics. I think the last time I checked, obviously, majority of the fans of the page are in the States, but I think the country that was second in the number of likes was the Philippines, and I think Manila was the main source of that. We also have a lot in Turkey as well, I think if memory serves me correctly. But in terms of the page, like as Aaron said, it was born out of a bit of respect for Johnny Red, and I saw a lane for it on Facebook, so I just went for it, and we've grown the page organically, which is something that I'm proud of. Like, we haven't bought likes or, flogged a dead horse in terms of promoting it. It's just sort of gathered momentum, through posts being shared. And obviously, there's a lot of people who like the page who grew up watching him on Bulls broadcasts, like Aaron and myself. It holds a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Nostalgia?
Nostalgia, exactly. Thank you. And here we are. It's, it's sitting on, I think, 5,500 or something like that, or close to it. It's just a little hobby of ours, and we treat it with the respect that it deserves. And the content is all Bulls, obviously, past and present. Adam, you actually mentioned how we've befriended one of Red's sons, Matt, and I'll pass that over to Aaron because he can talk a little bit more about Matt because he's actually met him. AJ, over to you.
Yeah, just on the content of the page, Howes and I have both been fans of the Bulls for 25 years. So one thing that we do pride ourselves on is the quality of the content. Like, we want to make sure that we can educate a lot of the younger Bulls fans on some of the older stuff, because a lot of the large portion of the age demographic that like our page, a lot of them weren't even born during Jordan's career. So it gives us an opportunity to expand their knowledge a little bit as well. And when I was over in Chicago this year, I had the opportunity to meet up with Matt Kerr at a couple of games, and he's a really, really cool dude, and gave me the opportunity to wear his dad's championship rings and took some photos with him and whatnot. It kind of amazes me that he walks around town and walks around games wearing these rock-heavy NBA championship rings, but he was a really, really good guy and gave me the opportunity to go down into the other Bulls family room and under the stands, which was a really cool thing. And yeah, he said that he really appreciates what Adam and I do with the other page that's dedicated to his legendary father.
Fantastic. Whilst we've been chatting away, guys, we've had a bit of interaction on Twitter with a few people retweeting for us, which is fantastic. So I want to just quickly thank some of those guys. We got a thank you from Tom Reed, who's from the Believe the Hype NBA podcast. He mentioned congrats on episode 50 a little earlier. Also, Chris, who was the designer of the In All Airness logo that's currently used for the podcast art. So thanks, Chris, for also taking an interest there. We've had a few retweets from Air Adam, Kobe Sabrino, a mate of mine over in Europe, Nathan Hand, who else? Josh Armour, Michael Tomalaris. I'm sorry if I butchered your surname there. He's favorited the tweet about it. And former guest of the show, Bill Woods, who was in episode 30, a long-time employee with the 10 Network and was synonymous with NBA and NBL here in Australia during the 1990s. He's also retweeted the link to the chat as well, so thanks, Bill, for that. And a few other guys, Shane Ryan, no relation, and Gustavo Vega.
Gus!
Yeah, so Gus, who's a regular contributor back and forwards via Twitter that we converse with as well. So plenty of things going on via Twitter. It's a pretty cool experience. So we're getting there. We'll ironed out the kinks, and now the audio should be pretty good.
It's something, Adam, that you mentioned before that you wanted to try earlier on in the year, and we took our time actually giving it a go for the first time, but this is about as cool as it gets.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Yeah, we tried it back in April is when I actually realised that we had a go at trying to get this going the first time round. So it's taken a while, but we've got there eventually, and here we are. The first episode I recorded was at my home back in Bendigo in Victoria before we actually moved interstate. And then I recorded episode 2 with Tom Dorr from my mum and dad's joint, or my mum and dad's house, I guess I should say, just before we moved interstate, a day or two before we actually drove interstate to move where we are now here in Coffs Harbour in New South Wales. And then every other episode since, so episode 3 onwards, has been recorded up here in Coffs Harbour. The third guest that I had was Christian Laettner. So that was a pretty sweet guest to get on the early on in the podcast history as well. So I just got in touch with him via Twitter, and then I woke up the next day and there was a message from him in my inbox to say, here's my phone number, would you like to call me? So that's how that episode came about. It was unbelievable. I had no idea he'd even reply, let alone go to that stage where he inboxed me and said, here's my contact details. And then within about 2 days, I obviously swatted up on all the research I could, and he became a guest, and he was the third guest on the show. So some pretty cool beginnings there, which is hard to believe even to this day.
I've got no problems in saying that Christian Laettner is one of my white player man crushes that I've had in my duration as an NBA fan. And you hear certain stories about him being a little bit arrogant and rude and whatnot, but that interview that you had with him was a lot better than what I expected, and I thought it was an excellent interview.
From my end, that you didn't expect as much from me? No, just a bad joke.
No. My expectations of him, although I didn't really know how much he'd give you, and he was excellent.
Yeah, he was really good. The audio quality wasn't quite as good. It sort of cut out a little bit because I was at my mother-in-law's house I had the door closed and I was trying to keep all the noise out, but the connection on the phone and their internet wasn't great, so it cut out a little bit. But Christian was fantastic, and he was so open, and that's been a bit of a staple through a lot of the guests. For some reason, I'm not sure why, they just tend to open up and give me a lot of information. True. And I say it all the time, and I sound like a broken record when I say, oh, gee, thanks for being so open and honest, but I really do mean it because they owe me nothing. Okay, crickets.
And if you haven't listened to any of the In All Airness episodes, crickets is often what you'll hear. So you'll be used to that.
No dead air, gentlemen. No dead air.
No, that's right.
Hi, Adam. This is Steve from the First Take UK podcast. Just want to say many congratulations on 50 episodes and look forward to hearing many more.
That was the first 3 episodes. We'll quickly move on to episode 4, which was probably one of the biggest highlights I've had in my life, was to actually have the great Andrew Gaze as a guest on the podcast, especially so early on in the history of the show.
Can I just interrupt for one moment?
Please do, Adam. Yep.
Mr. Ryan, and just say that one of the biggest highlights of my life is that I've got Drewy's autograph. Just wanted to put that out there.
Well, I mean, most people around the world will know who Andrew Gaze is if you're a fan of this podcast. But I have to say that he's basketball royalty in Australia. So to be able to have a chance to speak with him, and that conversation I think was the longest by far of the first 4 episodes. It went for about an hour and 40, and the only reason it ended is because he actually had to go and do some coaching at his local stadium, so we had to actually end the call after I held him hostage for quite some time. So he was so open and generous. He sounds and he's exactly like you'd expect him to be, but even to a higher level, which is I didn't think was possible, but he was so accommodating.
Yeah.
That was just an incredible chance to have a chance to speak to somebody of his stature, and it was awesome.
You mentioned before that it was the longest chat that you'd had with the player up until this point. It was also the most enthusiastic of the conversations that you'd had with players up to that point. He came across like it just drank about 8 or 10 espresso coffees before he came onto the podcast. He was really full of beans.
I was ridiculously nervous. And then also in the first sort of 10 to 15 minutes of the episode, the phone rang at the house where I was as well. It rang twice, I think. And the second time it rang, I wanted to pick it up and throw it through the window because I couldn't believe it went off a second time. But that's just sort of the stuff that happens with podcasts, I guess. But it's just great to be able to chat with him and speak about his whole experiences growing up and then all the basketball-related stuff that happened as well. So he was just a phenomenal guest to have. The cool thing about that episode was that the fact that I chatted with Andrew, that then led to me being able to chat with guest number 5, who was Luc Longley. I got to chat to Luke because Andrew was so, what's the word? He was just generous enough to actually tell Luke about the show and the podcast and say that I was worthy of having a chat with in terms of not being able to, I wouldn't waste his time because I was well researched. So that was really cool to hear that as well, that Andrew vouched for me to then allow the great Luc Longley to be guest number 5.
Very cool. What Adam said, Howes said before about he has drew his autograph. That's a private joke in between Howes and myself because Andrew made an appearance in a small town called Horsham, which is where I first met Adam back in 1994. It's my hometown, and Drew was in town for a book signing session at Book City in Horsham Plaza, and we were able to take a couple of cards in, and we got Drew his autograph, and 20 years later, it's a bit of a catchphrase between the two of us that we've got Drew his autograph.
Fair enough. I mean, it is a good autograph to have, but obviously it's got a much bigger backstory than I first expected. There's a bit of interaction going on in Twitter here, guys. I'm getting quite excited, which is a bit of a worry. Shane Ryan has said that he's pumped that he just got a shout out on air, so that's good. He's up in Townsville in Queensland. James McKern, thanks very much for retweeting us about the chat as well. We've got someone whose name is And1SA. Pretty sure that's not his real name. Thanks for the retweet. Gustavo, he's joined back in the conversation as well. So, just to quickly revert back to the Twitter feed there as well, it's pretty cool to see this happening in real time.
And just checking, that last tweet from Gus was actually his 2 millionth tweet, because that guy is a fiend on Twitter.
So, Luc Longley, guys, quickly give you a bit of background. I don't think we're going to go into the exact depths of every single episode because I don't want to bore people and put them to sleep, because this will probably be a good cure for insomnia if we keep going this way. But the Luc Longley chat, that was another one that was via video, and I was just sitting there on a Skype call with him, and he was just so laid back, just sitting there chatting away, and that was another great conversation where he just opened up and talked about some of his incredible experiences that he's had, obviously in the NBA, but then also before that when he was a youngster growing up here in Australia before he actually headed OS. So that was a really great conversation to be able to have with two of Australia's basketball elite in the first sort of 5 episodes of the show. But anything you wanted to add at all from the Luc Longley discussion?
Howes and I had the opportunity to meet and speak with Luke at a breakfast. It was a Basketball Australia breakfast here in Melbourne a couple of years ago. The breakfast included Luc Longley, Ron Harper, Horace Grant, Alex English was there as well on the day, and we got an opportunity that day to meet Luke. We mentioned before that he was laid back during the conversation, and that guy is just a fantastic human being. How down to earth is that guy?
Yeah, very much so. He's just a gentle giant, really, for lack of a better term and choice of words. That breakfast, Dandenong, was just one of those lucky things that we sort of fell into, really. I got wind of it, I think, on the internet or something. I can't remember how, that they were going to be appearing out at Dandenong Stadium, which, for those of you who may be watching who aren't from Victoria, Dandenong Stadium isn't CBD or anything like that. It's an outer suburb. It's quite outer eastern, actually. Of all places for, a few NBA champions to be appearing at, it was quite odd. So I inquired about attending. Wasn't really confident that we, because we weren't invited or anything like that, but wasn't really confident that we could get out there. And so I just rang the number, and lo and behold, I think tickets, if memory serves me correct, were like $30 each, Aaron. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Something like $35 or something like that. And so Aaron and I just rocked up there, and in all our bull splendor. And
as 80s and 90s NBA fans, it just seemed criminal that breakfast wasn't advertised on national TV or something. How we didn't know about it and how we found about it, we were just blown away. And I can remember how when you told me about it, oh man, like the palms started sweating immediately. I'm like, I had to get to that breakfast. And I, like you, thought that the chances of us getting to it weren't going to be great. But when we locked it down and went, oh, what a morning! Remember the high that we were on afterwards.
Yeah, like we were on a massive high, and I think we summed it up best saying it was the best $30 we'd ever spent.
Yeah,
I can imagine, because I actually didn't even know it had happened, because I was still in Victoria at that time, and I would have been a 2-hour drive, probably at most, away from this happening. And had I known about it as well, I would have probably done all I could to actually get there as well. So yeah, pretty jealous of that encounter that you guys had, but it was great to have Big Luke on the show. So that was episode 5. Had some other great guests in the early single-digit episodes. Number 6, the guest was Cliff Robinson, Uncle Cliffy, which was really cool to have him on as one of the guests of the show as well. And it was around about this time I was starting to think about trying to do some topic-based episodes, and that's when I was asking Adam what he thought about coming onto the show, or I think it was around this time that he must have started suggesting that, Aaron, you might have been a good contact to sort of have to talk about that. But I had great Uncle Cliffy as episode 6. He was just a great guy to chat with. Really, all of them have been fantastic, so I can't really start picking out ones and say who was good and who was great. They were all fantastic to even afford their time to me. But number 7 was another Bulls-related player, Dennis Hobson from the Ohio State Buckeyes. He's a legend with them in college. He was on the 1991 NBA champion Chicago Bulls as well. So it's great to have Dennis Hobson on there. That was a video chat, actually, with Dennis Hobson. He was just sitting on his couch at home and just very casually chatting away. So that was, again, another time where I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, these guys are on camera just watching me, what's going on, I'm freaking out. But it gradually gets a little bit less and less nerve-wracking for me, but still, it's pretty mind-bending to think that sort of stuff can be even happening via Skype calls and things. So are there any other memories at all that you guys have from some of those episodes? Have you had a chance to even hear the Cliff Robinson or Dennis Hobson, and what did you make of those two guys?
Definitely heard both of the other podcasts, mate. I thought that Dennis Hobson was a terrific guest. And the other Cliff Robinson pod I actually heard when I was in India last year. That was one of the 3 of your podcasts that I managed to hear when I went overseas, and I was listening to them when I was in India last year. You must have been really pumping them out at this point.
Yeah, there was a stage at one point where I actually put out like 3 episodes in the space of 7 days. I was going absolutely berserk, pumping them out. I'm just looking back on the timeline now. The Luc Longley one was actually January 3rd, 2013, and then Cliff Robinson was January 10, Dennis Hobson January 13, and then Peter Vesey on episode 8, he was January 20th. So in the space of about 3 weeks, I had 4 episodes put together, because sometimes it just relies on the schedule of the guest and when they happen to be available. So all the stars aligned at that stage, and then in the space of maybe 3 weeks, I'd recorded almost 4 episodes worth of content. So that's something that I need to sort of keep working on, is the regularity of the schedule. But sometimes it just depends on the guest and when they're available. So they're the ones giving me their time. But Yeah, it's pretty awesome to have the chance to have those guys on as well. And speaking of Peter Vesey, the great legendary NBA reporter and columnist, he was just another really fascinating chat, and he opened up incredibly and even said some things that he'd told me that actually he had never said before in interviews. So, and he wanted to hold back some of the things he said in case he actually writes a book, which I think he has recently said that he's still in the planning stages of putting out a book, which will be just a fantastic read should that come to fruition.
The Peter Vesey podcast, if anyone wants to listen to a podcast that, as a 25-year NBA fan, it blew me away. Some of the content, some of the other stuff that Peter said to you during that pod about certain people, his opinions on certain people, blew me away. And I think that the other numbers would also reflect the fact that it's probably the pinnacle of your In All Airness pods, mate.
Thanks for that, mate. Yeah, it's definitely the most listened to episode to date. It's Peter Vesey, and then I believe the Kenny Anderson chat. I think he was maybe episode 31 or thereabouts. I'm not sure. We'll get to the later ones a bit down the track, but Kenny Anderson and Peter Vesey are the two most listened to ones, and then quite a lot of our topic-based episodes are actually right up in amongst the top of the episodes that have been listened to as well, which is great, and we'll get to some of those very shortly. Have you had a chance to listen to that episode with Peter Vesey, Adam? Because he certainly pulled no punches in some of the departments and giving his thoughts about certain players and personalities.
Yeah, I definitely did. Just to echo your sentiments, both your sentiments, it was a great pod. I think one of the things that made it even more enjoyable was Peter's backstory. He's got quite an interesting history leading up to when he became a journalist and covered the NBA. I think, if memory serves me correctly, he was an airborne ranger or something like that during the Vietnam conflict or something like that. Is that correct?
He has a very interesting background that, and I think at one stage as well, he also asked me if I knew where Penang was. I don't know if that was trying to test me or not, but thankfully I knew my world geography as well. So I said, yeah, it's up near Malaysia there. So thankfully I was in the right part of the world as well. But he has a really interesting background of what he actually did before he even got into the whole journalism world. So, yeah, quite fascinating.
And one of the other really big names in NBA journalist circles too from the 80s and 90s. So I think one of the other really big names that you've had on the pod and a really good get.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
Hi, Adam. It's Josh from redrockbasketball.com. Just want to say congratulations on reaching 50 episodes. You've done a fantastic job. The interviews are awesome, and I can't wait for another 50 more. Congratulations again, mate.
And just before we get into our first of the topic-based episodes, the guest number 9 was the one and only Ray Clay, the legendary Chicago Bulls PA announcer. Now, it was just incredible to be able to have a chance to chat with him, and he even kindly gave the voiceover that introduces the podcast every single episode. So that was just crazy to be able to hear him say that at the end of. I didn't actually include that in the released episode because it just got to the end and I said, oh, look, can I please ask a favour? Do you mind perhaps lending your voice to do an introduction for me? And then he said, yeah, that's fine. How about this? And then just paused for a second and then said what he did. It was just one take, and what he said was what we went with. So I've used that ever since to have as the introduction into all the episodes. I went back and redid all the openings to each episode, and it's just great to hear his voice because it's so synonymous with all the Chicago Bulls championships and then just that whole era of hoops. He was the most famous PA announcer, bar none.
I guess admitting that I hear voices in my head isn't a good thing, but it's a very cool thing that the voice that I often hear in my head is Ray Clay announcing the Bulls starting lineup, and it's often during the 1992 NBA Finals. I watch those games so many times that I can recite these announcing of the starting lineups and the whole pre-game introduction word for word. Their voice, an iconic voice, and a really good guest.
Yeah, he was great. Episode 10 of the podcast is the first topic-based episode. Now, we chatted about the 1993 NBA season, and Aaron, I might just open the floor up to you for the moment, mate, because this was your first exposure to doing podcast recording and whatnot, and the first episode that we did is in stark contrast, I guess, in terms of at least sense of humour, and that's based primarily because of me. I was very uptight about our first recording of the topic episodes, to say the least. Do you want to maybe just elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, you had a certain vision for the podcast. You wanted it to be, I think at that point in time, I had mentioned the Basketball Jones podcast and how they have a bit of fun and they have a bit of a laugh. And your retort to that was you wanted no piece of that whatsoever. You wanted a factual, serious, down the line, what kind of podcast, try to recap these moments in NBA history. As I heard you say that, I knew that wasn't going to happen, or if it did, it wouldn't last very long. Being my first attempt at a podcast, needless to say, the nerves, I was nervous as hell. I was really, really nervous. It was right from the start, though, it was such great fun to be able to research for a podcast and put notes and put all of this useless NBA information to some actual use. So any suckers who happen to download the podcast, but actually be able to hear it. I attempted at one point in time during the podcast to break the all-time podcast record for the most amount of words spoken in a podcast. That's how fast I was speaking, as I was so nervous. And afterwards, after hearing the completed product, I tore my performance apart.
It was good. It was good. And I kept on telling you, even to this day, there was something wrong with the way that the file was encoded. So in the first couple of minutes, you sound like a bit of a chipmunk, but it's because the file had caused some sort of issue with the speed. And my audio was okay, but yours went through about 1.25 speed instead. So it wasn't you, mate. So don't worry about it. But yeah, that was our first chat. And then since that 1993 season recap, we have sort of loosened up a bit in terms of at least having a bit more fun, because I was quite adamant that it needed to be straight down the line and serious. But yeah, that was never going to work, as you said. Adam, do you have anything you wanted to add at all about some of these topic-based episodes or anything else from that particular time?
No, like that, I guess if anything, really, I recommended Aaron to you to come on as a guest, because I knew inside that massive cranium of his is a brain that has absorbed so much NBA data over the years and facts, God knows what else, that it had, as Aaron said, it had to be put to good use finally, because I was sick of hearing it on and off, really, and why not drain others with it? You know what I mean? throw it out there for everyone else.
Oh, I love it. So I'm very glad that you suggested him and that we had a chance to be able to get him onto the show, because I have asked you on a few occasions and you've finally come on for episode 50, which is awesome to get you on the show as well, Adam. But yeah, it's great having Aaron alongside for a majority of these topic-based episodes. Do you want to add anything at all, Aaron, or just move on?
As I said before, the amount that I dwell and I think about this stuff all during the day, the amount of dunks that I throw down in doorways here at home, or I'm the prototype slow white boy with no reflexes, but the amount of Tim Hardaway killer crossovers that I throw at customers while I'm at work. It's nice to be able to put this what I think about 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and actually to either find like-minded people and talk about it and record it. And hey, if people want to listen to it, that's just a bonus, because we have a lot of fun putting them together.
Episode 11 had Sam Smith on there, who is the author of The Jordan Rules. He's also a Bulls.com columnist and a Basketball Hall of Fame member. Episode 12 was Sedale Threatt, the LA Laker great. I call him an LA Laker great. I'm not sure if other people would say he's one of the greats, but he was definitely filling in the time between when Magic Johnson had his forced retirement, late in 1991, through to the sort of era before, just the pre-Kobe and Shaq era. So had Sedale on as episode 12. Corey Blunt was a really great guest to have. He was episode 13. He's from the University of Cincinnati. He was a star there and an 11-year NBA veteran. So there's sort of 3 more episodes there. Do you guys have any thoughts at all that you wanted to say about any of those 3 guys?
Just on Sedale Threatt, he was awesome, especially during that 5-game series against the Suns in 1993. And it's a pretty long list, but he was actually one of the other true sharpshooters in the NBA. Always loved his release on his jump shot.
Yep, No, he was great. So I enjoyed his game, and he's living in Australia now. So I got onto him. I'm just trying to think. Actually, Sam Smith, I got onto him through an email. I emailed him, and he replied back within a day or so and said, "Yep, let's do it." And then I quickly spotted back up and reread the Jordan rules again before I spoke to him about 2 days later. So that's how that one came about. Sadale Threet is living in Australia. I got onto him through another email that I'd sent to him asking if he'd be interested in chatting, and that's how that one came to be. And Corey Blunt, I follow him on Twitter, and then I sent him a message at one stage, and then he replied back. Initially, I think, and he even mentioned this in the episode, towards the end, he actually thought I was some sort of stalker that it was just trying to annoy him, and he didn't realise I was like a legitimate sort of podcast person. I don't know, but then he said that he thought I was after his social security number or something like that, so he was a bit hesitant to begin with, but that came to be, and he was a great guy. He's got a really good story as well, the background behind Corey Blunt's rise to the NBA as well. And this leads us into episode 14, which was with Bob Hill, who's the NBA coaching great, and he's been a fantastic guy to have in my corner since I've had him on the show, because it was because of Bob Hill that then led to me having a chance to speak with the great Mike Fratello and also Joe Wolf as future guests of the show as well, because of his links to them as an assistant coach with the Ukraine just recently, who obviously played in the FIBA World Cup. So that was a really great episode, the Bob Hill chat, episode 14. So anything you want to mention at all from there, guys, before we sort of just keep moving through?
Yeah, Bob Hill, for a guy that Dennis Rodman once called Boner, it was a really good interview.
Yeah, he was very forthcoming, and I think that was quite another one of those longer form chats, but he's been great, and he's also looking at being involved in future episodes of the show down the line as well, so he'll be back as well. Episode 15 featured Iron Eagle, who's the Emmy award-winning play-by-play announcer and also the voice of NBA action. He's been on the show twice. He came back in a bit later on in the show's history, and we did a 2013 NBA season recap and a playoff preview. So he's been on twice, and he's been a fantastic guy to have as well as part of the show. I somehow convinced him to come back for that second time, but he's a really funny guy, very clever, and one of my favourite commentators as well. So that was great to have him on. Episode 16, guys. Craig Elo, Cleveland Cavaliers hero and NBA veteran. What are your thoughts about Mr. Elo, and did you hear that actual episode? He was nice and refreshing with his approach, and just a really laid-back, easygoing guy, and I really enjoyed chatting with him as well.
Cleveland Cavaliers hero or Jordan foil?
Depends on who you ask, but I like to try and paint my guests in the best possible light. So he's a Cleveland Cavaliers hero and NBA veteran. So that's how I choose to at least describe him.
Just backtrack a little bit.
Yep.
Your conversations with Iron Eagle, which included a 2013 playoff preview. That playoff preview also included a preview of the upcoming Chicago Bulls Brooklyn Nets series.
I know where this is going.
And needless to say, Mr. Ryan here showed the Brooklyn Nets a lot of love in his prediction for the series.
Shame on you, Adam.
Yeah.
Shame on you.
I know. I was torn because Iron actually works for the Nets as an announcer, and also because I thought the Bulls might just go down in 6 or 7 games. I erred on the side of caution and tried to placate, if that's even a word, I'm not sure, but tried to go on Iron's side as far as at least saying, yeah, I think the Nets might get up. That came back to bite me anyhow, didn't it?
Don't pander to the guests, mate.
I did that on that occasion for sure.
Hi Adam, it's Luke here, mate. Just thought I'd leave you a message of congratulations on 50 wonderful episodes of In All Airness. I've seen firsthand the amount of hard work, dedication and research you put into every single episode, so it's no surprise to me that your show has hit a real chord with basketball fans in Australia and also all over the world. So well done once again. I'm hoping for at least another 50 episodes. In terms of my favourite episodes of In All Airness, I would say the Andrew Gaze episode, Ray Clay, Bill Woods, and more recently David Bridges was fantastic, just to name a few. I can't wait for what the future holds, mate, for your podcast. All the best, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.
So episode 17 was Terry Cummings, NBA All-Star, Rookie of the Year, and basketball great. I got onto him through email as well. Just another chance. I dropped him an email and said, here, I did a show. I'm in Australia. Would you be interested in chatting? And he replied back and was, very forthcoming and wanted to organise a chat. So that was great. Episode 18 of the show was the 1996 NBA season. It was a recap. And again, Aaron, I think at the time we even said that we tore that one to shreds, where we dissected the Bulls' 72-10 season as they were on their way to championship number 4.
And if the other listeners will remember, the nerves hadn't settled by that second one either. I was still talking at warp speed.
No, that's all right, mate. It was fine. I still get nervous. I'm nervous as now while we're chatting right now. But the topic-based episodes are great fun, and there's heaps of research that we do going into them. And I then just take it to the nth degree by editing them down to within an inch of their lives, as I like to say when we chat as well. But they come out really well, so I'm really happy with all our topic-based episodes. I've got to make mention there's a fantastic tweet which has just appeared on my timeline from Nathan Hand. And he's actually done a graphic, and it's got a brick wall in the background, and it says, Adam, thanks for the shout out on the live podcast. And then it's got a little thumbs up, a basketball, and the Chicago Bulls logo. So that is absolutely fantastic. So thanks, Nathan. Next episodes, let's just quickly get through some of these guys so we can maybe just chat about a few other things as well. Episode 19, Aaron, we actually chatted about the 1990 to 1994 NBA All-Star Games.
Back when the All-Star Games were cool.
Yeah, that's when I think they were at their best in the 80s and then into the early 90s, and I guess it obviously correlates with the fact Jordan was still around, so I'm very biased in that regard, but they were still just awesome back at that time. So that was a really fun episode to be able to cover sort of 5 All-Star games in the space of one episode. And crickets. So as I mentioned, Iron Eagle came back on episode 20, and we did that 2013 season recap. Episode 21 was a great one. Talani Goodson, who's the executive producer of the number 1 NBA series on TV, Courtside Jones. And if you haven't watched that show yet, and you do have access to it, depending on where you are in the world, it's an absolute must-watch. Just a fantastically produced series with great interviews, video interviews, and discussions with NBA journeymen, NBA All-Stars, Hall of Famers, everything in between. So if you enjoy this podcast in any way, shape or form, you'll absolutely love Courtside Jones. And it was great to chat to Talani. He's been very helpful in helping me get some guests on the show as well. He was really instrumental in helping me get Kenny Anderson as a guest as well. So that was pretty cool too, to be able to have a chance to chat with Talani. Did you guys have an opportunity to hear that episode?
Yeah, certainly did.
Really nice guy, Talani. Again, Aaron, we had another episode of All-Star Game discussion. It was episode 22. 1995 through 1998 NBA All-Star Games. So just another opportunity for us to talk all things All-Stars.
Yeah, back in the 90s when the All-Star Game was something that you really, really look forward to, being able to see all the best NBA players play against each other in the one game, and just the glut of Hall of Famers, and I guess in hindsight, you can say they're Hall of Famers, but real superstar players that we had to watch back in the 90s made the All-Star Games that much better.
Now, in episode 23 and 24 and also 27, I partnered up with another great mate of mine, Todd Spear, and we did some different episodes. We did 2 retrospective episodes and also one called Retro GM, which was between 1987 and 1993. We put in our GM hats and we tried to assemble the best NBA teams that we could. So that was episode 23, and that was a really great idea that Todd actually had to come up with his retro GM. So that was a lot of fun, trying to research and choose our respective best team that we could from that era. Then in episode 24, Todd and I again chatted about, this time, the life and times of Drazen Petrovic. He does have a book about Drazen coming out, so when we know more about that, I'll certainly let you guys know. And then episode 27, we'll skip ahead for a minute, we also chatted about Reggie Lewis. So there was a couple of retrospectives about 2 guys who obviously lost their lives way too soon. And I want to thank Todd as well for his involvement in the podcast, because he's been great as well in some of those episodes.
Todd's an awesome NBA mind. He really is. And his knowledge that stretches back into the 80s, it even blows me away. And that's coming from a guy who looks down his nose at most other NBA fans. So really, really impressive NBA mind, and as you mentioned, desperately awaiting a Drazen book of his, especially because he told me that he's going to give us a free copy.
I love it. And he's a must follow on Twitter because he's an absolute NBA head. So it's at Todd Spear, so TODDSPEHR 35. And just a little tidbit, that 35 is in relation to the great Clarence Weatherspoon. I'm not understating things when I say great because Todd is the biggest Clarence Weatherspoon fan in the world.
When we all had the opportunity last year to all catch up and shoot a few hoops, we actually got together to have a shot, and I think that 99% of the time was spent talking NBA and not actually shooting the basketball, which was a lot of fun. Also, the other day that I won an NBA-style three-point shootout between the four of us, Howes, rightfully so, shaking his head. Todd rolled up on that day proudly wearing his retro champion Clarence Weatherspoon jersey.
I couldn't quite hear you. You're talking about some sort of three-point shootout, Aaron.
You seem to have that trouble on a regular basis, not being able to hear that you come in second.
No, it sort of cut out a bit there, mate, and I can't quite confirm or deny what happened in that three-point shootout.
I'm moving on. I deny everything.
It was good fun to catch up, but I can't remember the results of the actual tournament. Apparently it was a tournament. Three-point shootout, I should say.
Dial it down a bit. Dial it down.
Yeah, dial it down. And a quick shout-out to one of the great guys that I know, Ross Franco, who is over in North Carolina. He just sent through a tweet a few minutes ago just saying it's early on the East Coast. He's in bed watching on his iPhone on our live stream here on YouTube. So, Ross, thanks very much. He appeared on episode 47, I believe, of the podcast. We'll get to that a bit later on, but thank you, Ross, for your participation as well. Let's move on, guys, because I don't want to hold up you guys for too much longer. Episode 25 of the show, mate. Aaron, particularly, we were back on for a change, talking about the 1984 NBA draft. That was a fun one to do as well, and that was before we even had thought about doing the whole NB85 series.
As everyone knows, your podcast series is called In All Airness. It was at about this stage where I was referring to the podcast to my family and friends behind your back. The podcast was actually called In All Sweatshop.
I've got nothing to say. I don't know what to say. I feel bad that I've made you research for 36 hours of unpaid labour. I apologise.
Unpaid to the point where I've even become a financial contributor to the podcast.
Oh, goodness me. And as I said that last time, that $3.66 has really helped. I really appreciate the contributions. But no, mate, you've been a great a great co-host. You've completely caught me off guard, and I feel terribly bad for the fact that you've worked for nothing for the last 50 hours. Appreciate you being part of the show.
Just had a tweet from Shane Ryan asking, in reference to the three-point shootout that I won, when's the dunk comp?
Well done. The only dunking I'll be doing is donuts, unfortunately. So
yeah, Shane, you set us up with a 7-foot rim and a size 3 ball.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you, Shane, for joining in to say that one. That's made my night, that one. So moving on, guys. Episode 28 was Ricky Pierce, who's a 2-time NBA Sixth Man of the Year, All-Star, and another one of the basketball greats that I've been fortunate to have on the show. It was great to have a chat with Ricky, another really great, open guy. Certainly didn't mind chatting about his whole career and letting us know all about what he's achieved over the years. So that was great to have Ricky on. Reese Pedretti joined me for episode 29, and this was the 1995 NBA draft, and we did a recap of that one, which was something a bit different because obviously we're talking about mid-90s here as opposed to when Jordan was first drafted. So that was a fun one to do as well with Reese, and he is the co-host of one of the other Australian podcasts. It's called the Hoops Podcast with James McKern. So shout out to those guys on the Hoops Podcast. Episode 30, guys, was with Bill Woods, who is as I mentioned earlier, the Australian sports broadcaster, journalist, and I think I dubbed him a newsbreaker in the episode description as well. So jack of all trades. It was great to have Bill on there. As I mentioned, he was synonymous with all the NBA and NBL coverage on TV here in Australia back in the 1990s. And Todd Spear rejoined me again for that episode too. That was a really fun one.
It must have been at about this time that I was too worn out from all the other episodes to contribute.
Yeah. You must have finally had a gut full of me and said, nah, someone else can go on for a change. I've got a soft spot for Bill because he was obviously on TV front and centre here in Australia for many years back in the early 90s, so it was great to have a chance to speak with him. Episode 31 was the New York City legend, NCAA legend and NBA All-Star Kenny Anderson, as I said, and it was great to have Kenny on. He's the most listened to former player that I've had on the show. The Peter Vesey episode, I think, trumps everybody, but as far as former players go, Kenny Anderson is the top of the chart there. Episode 32 was with Mike Fratello, and that was incredible to have him on for almost an hour. NBA Coach of the Year, TV broadcaster, Zara the Telestrator. He's currently just finished up the World Cup campaign with Ukraine in 2014 as we record this. It was great to have him on, and that was thanks to Bob Hill. He organised that chat for me, so many thanks to Bob Hill for that one, and that was great to have the Zara on. And he mentioned a couple of great stories, Aaron, about one of your favourite players, Dominique Wilkins.
When you mentioned to me that you were going to have the other Tsar on the podcast, yeah, I was expecting a story about Dominique, and yeah, he didn't let me down.
In Twitter, mate, on our chat, Ross Franco has chimed in. It's at VinManMJ23, and he asks, "Where did you find Horace Grant's glasses?"
Ross, I actually found them on eBay Hong Kong for $3.79.
The only problem was it was $75 postage.
$75 postage, cheap.
So, yeah, thanks, Ross, for that question. A great pick up there for Steenie, though, to have those Horace Grant goggles. They're phenomenal. Now, moving on, episode 33, as I mentioned, was Joe Wolf, high school All-American. He was a UNC star and NBA veteran. Thanks again to Bob Hill helping us to connect. Episode 34 was another really great one I enjoyed with Steve Lepovsky, NBA photographer, almost 23 years with the Boston Celtics. That was a really eye-opening interview, that one, where he talked about the history of some of the fantastic photos he's taken, including some great ones of Magic and Bird that took place on one of their jersey retirement ceremonies.
That was a cool listen, actually.
Some of the really iconic photos that we've seen over the years of NBA games. I went onto his website, which is Adam.
Basketballphoto.com. I've been put on the spot, but I'm pretty sure it's basketballphoto.com. Let me just check while we chat away. But he has some incredible photos.
Yeah, you go through his library and many, many really cool photos that we've seen over the years. Were actually taken by Steve Lipovsky, and that was excellent.
Yeah, it is basketballphoto.com. You're right.
Oh, nailed it. That's under pressure too. So thank you again for coming on the show, Steve. I'm not sure if you'll be listening to this, but in case you are, it was great to have you on, and you're a fantastic guest. Now, episode 35, I had another chance to chat with an Australian legend, Mark Bradtke, who's a 3-time NBL champion and a 4-time Olympian, and also played in the NBA. It was great to have a chance to be able to speak with Mark. I think I gave him a ring on his mobile phone via Skype whilst he was at work back in November of 2013, and it was good to be able to have a chance to speak with him about his great history in the game as well. So that was excellent too, speaking to Mark Bradtke. Aaron, we came back in episode 36 and we chatted about the great NBA games. That was a new feature that I introduced at that time, and we chatted about Jordan's 69-point demolition on the Cleveland Cavaliers, although the Bulls did win in overtime, so it wasn't really a demolition at all, but it was an overtime victory. That was a pretty fun episode to chat about that particular game.
Correct. And having known of that game and having seen a few highlights of that game over the first 10 or 15 years of being an NBA fan, it actually took me probably until about 10 years ago until I actually saw a copy of that game. It didn't disappoint me at all. And then to try to break it down on a podcast, yeah, even better.
Pretty sweet. Now, moving on again, Aaron, we came back with yet another topic-based episode. Number 37, we were chatting about the 1994 NBA season, which was a unique one in the fact that Jordan had retired, obviously, the previous year, and this was the first full season without MJ, the only full season, really, without MJ. That was all Scottie Pippen as far as the Chicago Bulls were concerned. That was a great episode, too, if I don't say so myself.
And very modest of you, mate. Also... Yeah, the 94 season was the second time as an NBA fan that brought a tear to my eye when the Atlanta Hawks traded Dominique to the LA Clippers in early of 1994.
That's something that you've mentioned in a couple of our topic-based episodes as well, mate, where your frustration at the fact and your disappointment at the fact that he was sent packing has certainly been brought up on a few occasions, and understandably so too.
Scarred is the word, I believe. Scarred.
For life.
For life, exactly.
I say it all the time. He's the Australian Bill Simmons. Big congratulations to In All Airness, 50 episodes. This is Hank McCoy here. Just want to say you do a fantastic job and your research is far second to none. But my question is, when are you going to cover MJ's biggest game of his career? Back in 95, 96, I think it was, MJ saved the world against the Monstars. I want to hear all about it, buddy. I want to hear all about it. Congrats again. 50 episodes. A job well done. Something to be proud of, mate.
Episode 38, Aaron. Again, I've brought you back. Boy, talk about sweatshop. You are right. We chatted about the 1988 NBA All-Star Game. In my opinion, the best All-Star Game of all time at Chicago Stadium. And you're even wearing a T-shirt which is about the Chicago Stadium at the moment, Aaron. But remember the Raw. Fantastic T-shirt in itself. But yeah, that was a great opportunity for us to be able to speak about one of the most iconic All-Star games in history.
Another one of those games that you see highlights of, especially on Come Fly With Me. And again, it probably took me about 10 or 11 years after the actual game itself before I actually saw a copy of the other game. And again, to be able to pick it apart, a lot of fun. The greatest All-Star game ever.
Adam, do you have a particular favourite All-Star game going back in the years, or too hard to pick just one?
Oh.
I'll put you on the spot.
Off the top of my head, yeah, you put me on the spot a little bit. It's been a long time since I've gone back and watched a lot of those ones from the 90s, to be honest. I don't have a massive collection of DVDs like Aaron. I don't have a VCR anymore to watch any of the VHS tapes that I have, and that's if they would still work. Who knows? I've got nothing right now, mate.
I'll put you on the spot. That's no worries. Now,
How's wasn't the NBA fan to really watch a game and then rewatch it 1,000 times, like perhaps you and I were.
That's true.
Mr. Ryan, he was more the kind of fan who would play NBA Live on the Mega Drive and try and recreate Chicago Bulls seasons stat for stat. For example, if in a game at Milwaukee during the 95-96 season, Dennis Rodman had 18 rebounds, Adam would then go and play the game on the Sega Mega Drive here in Australia, or the other Genesis, I guess, in the other US, and try and get exactly 18 rebounds with Dennis. And it used to, and still drives me nuts.
I love it. So I tried to match the stat sheets. That's commitment, ads. Well done, mate.
Thank you. I wasn't always successful, but...
I love it. No, that's fantastic. Moving on, guys, we better get through because I can start seeing the letter Z appearing above some people's heads as they listen to this, I'm sure. Episode 39 and episode 40, it was a two-part extravaganza with Jim McIlvaine, who's a star at Marquette in college and also an NBA veteran. One of my favourite guests overall to have on the show to date has been Jim McIlvaine. He was awesome to chat with, and he's been very accommodating since we've spoken as well, and he will be returning to the show. I've somehow convinced him to come back on a second time, even after his wife must have put out a picture of himself on milk cartons because he went missing for so long when he chatted to me. But it was great to have him as a guest. Did you hear that conversation with Jim, the two-parter?
I did. I listened to it whilst I was up in Echuca visiting my mum. I also think that I somehow that added to the massive data roaming bill that I got later that month upon returning back to Melbourne.
Whoops, sorry about that.
That's not your problem. That's all my problem. But I did enjoy the chat. Jim was a very interesting character. Something I want to touch on, a lot of those guys, like the journeyman guys, you don't hear their stories told often, whether it was in the past or even now. Obviously, they've never been in the spotlight like the superstars of the day. And that's one of the great things about your pod, Ads, is that it shines a light on these guys and it really gives them a chance to delve into their careers and their own little stories and anecdotes. A lot of stuff that you'd never hear before, and a lot of it is really eye-opening and revealing. And as you would like to say, it's a great insight.
Yes. Yeah, one of my most overused terms. Oh, thanks for that insight. I really appreciate that. But again, it's one of those things I do really mean. And thanks for the kind words there, because, yeah, I really enjoy the ones where it's the guys who aren't the superstars because they do offer a different perspective sometimes of things that you just never heard before. And that was definitely the case with Jim, because he had some great stories too about, and even went into the behind the scenes about his contract that is still talked about to this day. So he went to the whole behind the scenes of that and gave a great explanation about his thinking and his agent's thinking. So couldn't be happier to have him on as a guest, and he'll be back in the future as well.
I actually wrote in my notes about the podcast that I had zero expectations of Jim McIlvaine. I had no idea what to expect. Never heard the guy talk before. But again, what Hal said just before was that a lot of these podcasts have given me a whole different perspective on a lot of these guys that I never really followed that closely back when they were playing. So I like to get to hear them speak and hear their backstory, and Jim in particular had a lot of really cool behind the scenes stuff, a bit of inside stuff. 90s NBA reference for you. Another great interview.
Another candidate for that was Joe Wolf as well, just going back earlier into the podcast. He was another great listen. And see, to me, he was always just a person who I would get as a double up in a packet of NBA hoops cards. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, definitely.
I don't know why, but I'd always seem to get Joe Wolf's cards in hoops when I buy a pack of hoops. Some of those players that back in the 90s when you were collecting basketball cards and watching, they were just on the peripherum. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
perfectly said.
A lot of those double ups that you get of Joe Wolf in NBA hoops packs would often be sacrificed to the basketball card gods, Adam.
Yes, they would.
Yes, they Wolf.
That's another whole episode, is basketball card collecting, and we'll probably will do that at some stage in the future.
That would be very cool. That would be a good one.
Episode 41 was with Eddie Johnson, another NBA Sixth Man of the Year. He was a star at Illinois in college. He now works for the Phoenix Suns as a TV analyst, and he's also put out a book recently as well. It was great to have Eddie Johnson on the show. Really enjoyed chatting with him. And episode 42 was a very interesting one because the initial recording of it went completely AWOL. There was an error when I actually recorded our first chat. It was with Kendall Gill, and he's also another Illinois great, just by chance, an All-American and also NBA star. Now, episode 42, I'd done the recording, a good hour's worth of conversation with Kendall, and then I said, thanks, Kendall, been great chatting with you. I go, I'll let you know when the episode goes live. And then he said, yep, no worries, hang up the call. And then I go to play back the audio just to make sure it's all recorded. And we both just came out sounding like Doctor Who Daleks. So the audio was completely warped. Couldn't hear anything that either of us were saying. And I was absolutely distraught because that whole conversation just went up in smoke. So luckily, I got back in touch with him via message about 20 minutes later and said, I'm really sorry, but the conversation's just gone to the audio gods. Is there any chance you'd be interested in maybe redoing some of it, or can I transcribe some of the chat? Because I recorded it back up on my phone, but the audio was not nearly as good quality, so I didn't want to put that up because it was just too poor a quality. And then he replied back and said, let's just chat tomorrow again at the same time and we'll go through it all again. So he was incredible, Kendall, to be able to do that. So thank you very much to Kendall Gill. And I varied up the conversation the next day. We didn't repeat exactly the same stuff, and he was very accommodating. So there's a little bit of a backstory behind that one. And I want to thank Gustavo, because I think earlier in our conversation on the live stream here, he asked if I was going to make mention about the episode that fell through initially with Kendall. So there you go, Gustavo. Thanks. So what did you guys think of the episode that actually did finally go to air?
Eddie Johnson. Sorry, I'll skip back to Eddie Johnson. One of the greatest quick-release jump shooters in NBA history. Again, another one of those guys that loved his shooting stroke. Kendall Gill also was a big fan of Kendall when he played. I think it was because he patented his game a lot after MJ. So I thought that he looked a bit like MJ when he played, and was at 6'5", was a ferocious dunker too. You almost call him a power dunker at the shooting guard spot.
Great dunker, no doubt about that. Episode 43 was with Bill Cartwright, NCAA All-American, All-Star in his early years in the NBA, and 5-time NBA champion, if you don't mind, as well. It was great to have a chance to chat to Bill, and he has obviously a unique voice. Just really great opportunity to speak with him about his whole basketball career. So gave him a call up on the phone after an email that went through, and he said, yeah, let's have a chat. So that one came to fruition quite quickly, and that was great to have him on the show earlier this year in 2014 as we record this. Todd Spear rejoined me again for episode 44. We chatted about another great NBA game, Michael Jordan's 63-point performance against the Celtics in '86, one of the iconic MJ performances in their double OT loss to the Celts. And then episode 45 was Jeff Ruland, a high school All-American, NCAA great, and NBA All-Star. And I reckon he's still one of the most underrated players in NBA history because of injury that sort of stopped his ascension into the NBA in the early to mid-'80s. So that's the next sort of 3 episodes that progressed after the Kendall Gill chat. Anything you want to add about those guys?
Jeff Ruland was one half of the dynamic duo of McFilthy and McNasty, along with Rick Mahorn, and again, a guy that I knew very little of until I saw him play in a game for the 76ers in the 92 season after he made his comeback from his injury. Didn't really know much about him, only to learn down the track that he was a fantastic player. As you mentioned, probably underrated because injuries really cut his career short.
Let's just quickly move on. Episode 46 couldn't have been almost more nervous than this one. This was with Rick Barry, one of the 50 greatest NBA players in history. I emailed him out of the blue and just said, here's some information about me, and would you like to have a chat about your career? And I didn't expect to even get a reply back, but the next day he had replied and said, here's some times I'm available, here's my Skype details, and then I was chatting to him on Skype within about 3 or 4 days of actually reaching out to him. So I swatted up again and did a lot of research, and because of his incredible history in the game, both NBA and ABA, quite nervous heading into that conversation, but he was really great and, of course, never short of some things to say about any opponent or his whole career. He just laid it out there, and I really enjoyed that one as well. So did you guys have a chance to hear that one?
He definitely sounded in the podcast as confident in himself as what you've often heard from a lot of sources. Also thought it was quite funny that at the end of the podcast he was hawking his basketball shoes.
Was he Atlanta hawking them or just hawking them? That's a joke that I probably wish I didn't say.
I think he was Hersey hawking them.
Well played, Adam. He did want to add that little promo in at the end, and I don't mind that at all because he's given me an hour of his time, and he's one of the 50 greatest players of all time. So if he likes to chat about a product he's got on the market, by all means, go ahead, Rick.
I'm sure that he would have seen a significant spike in the sales of Ectio basketball sneakers after the podcast.
I'd say that sales would have skyrocketed, maybe 1 or 2.
You would have had returns back to the shop.
Aaron, what would we do without you? Comic relief. Episode 47, guys. We're almost up to date here. Episode 47 was with David Bridges, who was Michael Jordan's childhood friend. Obviously, they're still friends to this day, and this was an incredible chance to have a chat with one of MJ's confidants. And I thank my pal Ross Franco for this opportunity. Ross Franco is great friends with David, and obviously David's great friends with MJ. So a couple of degrees of separation from the great man himself. So thanks, Ross. And also it was great to have David on the show talking about his experiences as well, because I don't think I've ever even heard an interview with David other than a few quotes here and there from some old articles that I found online. So I think both of you guys had a chance to hear that one.
Yeah. Great interview. Everyone should take the other time out to hear. Also, up to that point in time, one of the greatest voices that you've had on a podcast as well.
Yeah, he had a great accent, didn't he?
Great accent.
Completely threw me off.
Yeah.
That was a great conversation for episode 47. Episode 48, it was Dayton legend and NBA draftee and international star Roosevelt Chapman. And we also used part of his audio from that conversation in the first of our NB85 segments of the separate series. We're chronicling MJ's 30th anniversary of being in the NBA, Aaron, as well. So you joined me there for episode 48. What did you make of chatting with Roosevelt?
Well, at this point in time, I had been working to the ground and was a seasoned podcasting veteran. It was my first opportunity ever to interview a former player like you've done so many times beforehand, and Roosevelt was such a good guy that it made it a really enjoyable experience for me. Loved every minute of it. It was great to talk to, and his stories were excellent as well, especially from a guy that had such a high profile when he played back in college and even played in the trials leading up to the 1984 Olympic Games. Was drafted by an NBA team but never actually played in an NBA game, but they had an amazing international career. So again, one of those guys that I hadn't really heard much about, and then of course having researched and even spoken to him, a guy that I think very highly of.
Yeah, really enjoyed chatting with him, and he was a really friendly guy, and I think I messaged him via Twitter. That's how that chat came to be, and then before we knew it, we were there chatting with him. So another good way for that conversation to take place. And episode 49, the last one before we wrap this bad boy up, guys, is chatting to Utah Jazz great, two-time Defensive Player of the Year and NBA All-Star, 7'4", Mark Eaton. Great to have a chance to chat with Mark Eaton. He was in the first All-Star game that I ever kept on videotape, the 1989 All-Star game, so I've got some fond memories of just even seeing him in that game and watching him get introduced in the introductions of all the West All-Stars before the game. Interesting story to his rise to the NBA as well.
I'm sorry, Howes, are we boring you? That's about the 8th time that you've yawned in the last half an hour. Mark Eaton's block shot numbers back in the 80s in particular were extraordinary. If you have a look back on him, he had one season where he had just over 450 block shots on the season and averaged just on 5 blocks a game. Amazing numbers.
Now, Adam, is there anything that you wanted to add, mate, before we actually do finally put a bow on this?
Not really, mate. I've flatlined a little bit in the last half an hour or so.
Really?
Before everybody wraps things up, I just want to thank you both for being such a pivotal part of being involved with the podcast and our friendship. I really am thankful for you guys as just friends in general, but also the chance that we've had to work together and just putting this sort of stuff together and just sharing our mutual love of NBA. So thanks very much to both of you for being involved. And I want to thank everybody who has taken the time to listen to 1 episode, 5 episodes, every episode, whatever, anything in between. I really do appreciate that as well. And I can't thank everybody enough for taking the time out of their day to listen to some of these podcast episodes. So that's sort of where it's at, guys. If you want to add anything at all to finish with.
Every time, Adam, Ryan, that you and I get on Skype, I tell my partner Laura that I'm just going to speak with Adam on Skype for 10 minutes, and it blows out to about an hour and a half. It's really cool to be able to talk to you about NBA because we could literally just go on and on and on forever. Really enjoyed this tonight. My only hope is that I haven't subconsciously picked my nose or something during the podcast. Apologies to anyone if I've gone a couple of knuckles deep.
Oh, wow. I don't know where to go from there, but thank you for everyone who's had any involvement at all with the show over the time, guests, people who have listened, anybody that's been involved. So thanks very much for that. And got plenty of more great things planned in the future. Shameless self-promotion, inallairness.com/podcast. We'll get you to all the different podcast episodes, and I'm sure there'll be some show notes that I'll put up with this episode as well. But I hope you've enjoyed having a look over parts of or all of this video. If you have got through this far, thank you very much, because that's an incredible effort to wait 90 minutes plus. And thanks, Adam, for staying up so late, given the fact that I know you need to be up very early. And actually, you too, Aaron. You have to be both up very early tomorrow morning, Australian time. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, mate. It's been fun.
I've got the day off tomorrow.
Oh. Well, thank you anyhow for being here for the last 90 plus minutes and remaining conscious for the most part. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me on. It's nice to make my inaugural podcast debut. Hopefully down the line we can do it again.
Indeed. All right. Catch you later, guys. As always, thank you for listening. I encourage you to interact with the show, suggest topics for future episodes or guests you'd like to hear conversations with. I welcome your voicemail. Simply visit inallairness.com/voice. Click Start Recording, leave your message and press stop. You can even listen back to what you've said before submitting. Press send and you're done. That easy. Since last In All Airness episode, plenty of great feedback has been received. 8 reviews have been added, 7 via iTunes and 1 via Stitcher. I'll read 2 of them now, and the following reviews will appear in future episodes. First up, thank you to Jake Dorr, who lives here in Australia. He says, "Hi Adam, thanks so much for your efforts with the podcast. I love the fact that it's all about 90s basketball, the best era. I can't believe all the fantastic guests you have secured for your show. Great work. Can't wait to hear which guests you will have on the show in future. Hey, did you hear Michael Jordan play for the Wizards? Me neither." A nice little way to finish off that review. Thanks, Jake. I really appreciate your support, mate. And the next review is from the USA iTunes store. It's titled Best Basketball History Podcast. It's a fair start. And the username is Bobby D, aka Dixon Dolsrad. Thanks, Dixon, for this review. He says, "This is a great podcast for any basketball fan that loves hearing stories about the game from the 80s and 90s. Adam gets great guests, and the stories and insights give the listener a better feel and understanding for what it was like being there. These podcasts also have a great shelf life, and because they are historical, you can go back and listen to older episodes as well as the great new content. I highly recommend this podcast. Well, thanks very much, Dixon. That's very encouraging. Now, worldwide, the show currently has 46 reviews, which is just great. 43 from iTunes and 3 appear on Stitcher. Thanks for your great support. If you add a review, I'd love to mention your name in a future episode of the show. Your ratings and reviews are one of the best ways to support the podcast, and they directly help me to reach a wider audience. And this gives you, the listener, more opportunity to hear conversations with great guests. You can subscribe to my show in various ways, inallairness.com/iTunes. Alternatively, add it to your Stitcher playlist, inallairness.com/Stitcher. My RSS feed also appears in the right-hand sidebar of my website. You can subscribe to the show on Player FM, TuneIn Radio, and other podcatchers. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter @inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.